Judge just ruled in Katy Perry's favor, though, her real estate deals. She has been wrapped up in this lawsuit with the billionaire that sold her house back in 2020, but she just had a big win in court.
You think Katy Perry's estate is the most glamorous, pristine sanctuary in Montecito, California, but it's not. Behind the flawless, candy-coated facade of this $15 million property lay a hidden world of rotting foundations, toxic air, and environmental ruin. The pop star didn't just win a mansion as she inherited a multi-million-dollar structural disaster that was quietly self-destructing from the inside out. Even years before this purchase, Perry is known to have a toxic history when it comes to acquiring real estate. Let's unfold every ugly story behind Katy's big property moves. The candy-coated fortress and the rot beneath. Imagine stepping onto 2.4 acres of prime Montecito real estate and feeling like you just walked face first into a living, breathing music video. It's exactly what you'd expect from the woman who turned whipped cream canisters into fashion statements and made candy-colored hair a cultural movement. The vibe across this sprawling multi-structure compound is pure, unapologetic California dream. Lush, manicured Mediterranean gardens explode with vibrant pink bougainvillea, framing sun-drenched terraces that boast panoramic views of the Pacific Ocean on one side and the dramatic Santa Ynez foothills on the other. Walk through the soaring entryways of the 9,300-square-foot main villa, and the energy hits you instantly. It's a whimsical masterclass in playful luxury. Think bold, custom art installations, rooms flooded with natural light, eclectic furniture that feels both vintage and futuristic, and a professional chef's kitchen designed for high-profile entertaining. Outside, a pristine resort-style pool glimmers under the Santa Barbara sun, flanked by two hyper-stylish detached guest houses and a private tennis court. It is a masterfully curated sanctuary tailored to a legendary pop persona, vibrant, fun, fiercely protected, and dripping in multi-million-dollar charm. But if you strip away the A-list glamour, the picture-perfect staging, and the brilliant California sun, you'll find that this colorful paradise was harboring a dark, expensive secret. While a brutal, multi-year courtroom war raged over who legally owned the keys, the estate sat entirely abandoned. Locked behind iron security gates, without an active maintenance crew or climate control, the elements silently went to work. When Katy Perry's team finally secured legal possession of the home, they deployed a specialized forensic army of 25 structural inspectors and architects to comb through the property. What they uncovered lurking just beneath that pristine, magical surface wasn't a celebrity wonderland. It was millions of dollars in structural decay and environmental chaos. The absolute worst thing they found inside the estate was entirely invisible from the manicured lawns. Down in the dark, unventilated crawl spaces and subterranean lower levels beneath the main villa, inspectors discovered massive, unchecked water damage. Because the mansion sat completely neglected during the 4-year litigation freeze, minor drainage flaws transformed into a structural disaster. Rainwater and underground coastal moisture had consistently seeped through the lower foundation walls without anyone there to pump it out or dry it down. The standing moisture completely rotted heavy structural wood beams and began quietly compromising sections of the concrete foundation. Worse yet, in the stagnant, humid air of a closed-up Montecito mansion, this constant water intrusion turned the lower cavities of the home into a massive, thriving breeding ground for toxic mold. The pristine million-dollar interior air quality was entirely ruined from the bottom up, requiring a brutal, down-to-the-studs remediation process before anyone could safely spend a single night inside. Step outside the rotting lower levels and onto the estate's sprawling acreage, and the forensic team ran straight into a scene that looked less like a luxury resort and more like an emergency disaster zone. Right in the middle of the lush, historic grounds, a massive, mature tree had suffered a catastrophic collapse. Montecito's microclimate features heavy winds and saturated soil, and without a landscaping team on site to trim, brace, or care for the estate's older canopy, the giant tree simply snapped. When it came crashing down, it didn't just make a mess, it completely crushed expensive, custom landscape architecture, shattered section lines of decorative perimeter fencing, and entirely blocked the main access pathways threading through the property. The fallen timber sat rotting in the open elements for months, inviting pests and turning a premier piece of manicured estate land into a wild, hazardous obstruction that required heavy industrial machinery just to clear away. Luxury homes are incredibly fragile ecosystems. You cannot simply turn off the lights, walk away for a few years, and expect them to stay perfect. The third major issue uncovered by the inspection team was the sheer, devastating toll of chronic deferred maintenance. Because the house was trapped in legal limbo, the complex, high-end automated systems that keep a mega-mansion alive, like industrial HVAC climate controls, smart home wiring, and automated air filtration, were completely shut down or left to fail. Without constant airflow, the expensive custom drywall warped, high-end fixtures oxidized in the salty coastal air, and the home's intricate internal plumbing sat stagnant, leading to degraded seals and localized pipe leaks. The brilliant, playful craftsmanship that defined the home's interior in 2020 had essentially withered away from sheer neglect, proving that a house left without human care will actively begin to self-destruct. The final blow to the estate's magical facade came courtesy of Santa Barbara County's most notorious natural threat: torrential seasonal rains and mud runoff. Inspectors found that the property had been heavily impacted by local flooding and debris flow during its years of abandonment. Montecito hillsides are famous for sending rivers of mud, silt, and heavy runoff downward during major storm cycles. Usually, an estate of this caliber relies on a sophisticated network of catch basins, French drains, and a daily grounds crew to divert the sludge. But with zero on-site intervention, natural runoff breached the property lines. Thick layers of mud and rocky silt poured onto the outdoor terraces, pooled deeply against the external walls of the guest cottages, and completely choked out the specialized drainage systems. The estate was literally being choked by the local landscape, creating a massive, muddy graveyard of debris that cost a fortune to excavate. This shocking contrast between pop star perfection and structural ruin became the ultimate weapon. Katy Perry's legal team meticulously documented every single piece of rot, every square inch of mold, and every pile of flood silt, dragging the photos into open court. They used the sheer scale of the decay to successfully slash the final payout to the seller's estate by a staggering $1.8 million, proving that while the estate's hidden problems were a nightmare to find, they were incredibly lucrative in the hands of a brilliant legal team. But how did a simple property transaction devolve into a half-decade-long war zone? The Zoom secret and the 5-year feud. The chaos began almost immediately after the ink dried in July 2020. Carl Westcott, the 80-year-old entrepreneur who founded 1-800 Flowers, had purchased the historic 8-bedroom Montecito estate just weeks prior. Suffering from Huntington's disease and heavily medicated on major opiates following a serious spinal surgery, Westcott realized days later that he had signed away his home. When he tried to rescind the deal, Katy Perry didn't back down. Backed by her business manager, Bernie Goodvie, her legal apparatus immediately clamped down, locking the ailing veteran into an unyielding court battle that would paralyze the property for 5 years. For years, the public phase of the trial played out like an asymmetric corporate invasion. Westcott's family fiercely argued that his frail medical state left him of unsound mind and entirely incompetent to give intelligent consent. Perry's high-powered legal team countered with ice-cold pragmatism, presenting evidence that Westcott had actively negotiated the $15 million price tag and even gave Perry a personal walkthrough.
Katy Perry purchased this beautiful Santa Barbara mansion for $15 million in July of 2020.
The first major climax came in late 2023, when Los Angeles County Superior Court Judge Joseph Lipner ruled in Perry's favor, stating there was no persuasive evidence of mental incapacity. Perry formally took possession of the keys, but the war was far from over. Instead of moving in quietly, Perry immediately bifurcated the lawsuit, turning around to sue Westcott's estate for an additional $5 million in damages. Her camp claimed that because she was locked out of the home during the 4 years of litigation, she had suffered over $3.5 million in lost potential rental value. and required $1.3 million to fix the rotting deferred maintenance on the property. This aggressive move sparked intense public backlash, with Westcott's family publicly slamming the pop star for exhibiting entitled celebrity behavior and possessing zero empathy for a bedridden veteran. The drama reached a bizarre boiling point when Perry finally testified via Zoom. In a tense, 55-minute deposition, frequently interrupted by furious objections from her own lawyers, a shocking courtroom secret spilled into the public record. Katy Perry didn't actually own the house. Under intense cross-examination, she admitted she hadn't contributed a single dollar to the initial purchase. The entire deal had been executed through an opaque entity called D-Dove-B LLC, and the true legal owner holding the title was her partner, actor Orlando Bloom. When the defense pressed Perry on what exactly she was trying to accomplish by dragging a dying veteran's family through endless litigation, the pop star shot back with a single word: justice. The final hammer fell late in 2025. Judge Lipner handed down his ultimate damages ruling, ordering that the Westcott estate pay Perry $1.84 million. While her team didn't get the full $5 million they aggressively demanded, the judge agreed she was owed $2.8 million for lost rental income, knocking off offsets for the capital her team had withheld during the trial. In a final, savage financial twist, the $1.8 million won't even be paid out directly by the family. It is being aggressively deducted from the remaining $6 million balance Perry's team still owes Westcott for the house. The ruling officially closed one of Hollywood's most toxic real estate sagas, proving that when the superstar's legal machinery wants a piece of land, they will wage a war of total financial attrition until the last block of stone is theirs. Before Katy Perry ever set foot on the contested soil of Montecito, she had already spent years sharpening her legal blades against a far more sacred target: a hilltop sisterhood in Los Angeles. The Battle of the Holy Ground. Long before the 5-year siege over her Santa Barbara mansion, Katy Perry's high-stakes real estate playbook was forged in 2015 high on a Romanesque ridge in Los Angeles' historic Los Feliz neighborhood. Sitting on 8 pristine, sun-drenched acres was a sprawling 30,000-square-foot multi-structure convent belonging to the Sisters of the Most Holy and Immaculate Heart of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The property, featuring a grand medieval Spanish Gothic Tudor estate, a towering chapel, and a pristine pool, had been a sacred refuge for the elderly nuns who had pooled their own meager resources to buy the property back in 1972. They had occupied its quiet halls for decades, treating it as their final earthly sanctuary. However, as the number of active sisters dwindled to just 5, the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Los Angeles quietly stepped in. Claiming the aging women were in failing health and could no longer maintain the decaying architecture, the church forced the remaining nuns to move off-site in 2011 and aggressively sought to liquidate the magnificent property to cover massive institutional liabilities. Bypassing the remaining sisters entirely, the Archdiocese entered into private negotiations to sell the crown jewel of Los Feliz to none other than global pop superstar Katy Perry. The teenage dream singer was completely captivated by the sprawling estate, viewing it as the ultimate private oasis where she could quietly sip green tea, mediate, and find herself away from the relentless flashbulbs of Hollywood. She presented an incredibly lucrative offer, $14.5 million in total value, consisting of a staggering $10 million in direct upfront cash to the Archdiocese, alongside an additional $4.5 million earmarked to relocate an adjoining house of prayer for priests that held a long-term lease on the grounds. The Archbishop, Jose Gomez, jumped at the transaction, believing it was a clean, massive financial victory that would seamlessly resolve the church's mounting administrative debts. But neither the superstar nor the massive corporate machinery of the Catholic Church anticipated the fierce, holy rebellion waiting for them at the top of the hill. The remaining nuns, led by the fiercely independent Sister Rita Callanan and Sister Catherine Rose Holtzman, refused to accept that their life sanctuary was being bartered away behind closed doors without their consent. Even worse, the sisters were deeply appalled by the prospect of Katy Perry taking ownership of their sacred home. When the elderly nuns hopped online to research the multi-platinum artist, They were genuinely shocked and scandalized by her provocative music videos, her hypersexualized public image, and lyrics like, "I kissed a girl." To the devout sisters, handing over their dedicated house of God to a secular pop icon wasn't just a bad business deal. They believed it would be an absolute canonical sin that directly violated their sacred vows to the Catholic Church. Determined to block Perry at all costs, the rogue nuns staged a spectacular open mutiny against the leadership of the archdiocese. Armed with a 1992 civil incorporation document that they believed granted their specific order sole, independent authority over the estate's deed, the sisters preemptively executed an alternative sale. They bypassed the archbishop completely and sold the convent for $15.5 million to a prominent local restaurateur and boutique hotel developer named Dana Hollister. Hollister's vision for the property stood in stark contrast to Perry's private fortress. She intended to transform the historic Romanesque villa into a premier luxury boutique hotel, complete with a public restaurant and bar. To secure the deal and help the cash-strapped nuns, Hollister handed the sisters a swift $100,000 down payment, signed a promissory note, and immediately moved onto the property, installing private security guards at the heavy iron gates. To celebrate the takeover and mark her new territory, Hollister even threw a massive, high-profile 4th of July party directly on the convent grounds. The lines were officially and aggressively drawn. A local developer and two fiercely stubborn elderly nuns had successfully locked arms to block a global celebrity and the highest ranks of the Catholic clergy. The stage was set for an asymmetrical corporate, civil, and canonical war that would completely capture the public's attention and permanently scar the neighborhood's history. What followed this holy mutiny was a relentless multi-year display of legal warfare that pitted a global superstar and the massive administrative weight of the Catholic Church against a handful of elderly women. The human cost of attrition. In the fall of 2015, the Archdiocese and Perry's corporate vehicle, Bird Nest LLC, filed a crushing, multi-tiered lawsuit against Dana Hollister and the Rogue Sisters. The lawsuit accused the developer of malicious contractual interference, slander of title, and executing an invalid, fraudulent deed that effectively clouded the true ownership of the historic property. The legal strategy was clear: tie the defense up in a web of civil procedure and financial stress until they could no longer afford to stand their ground. As the battle lines hardened in the courtroom, Katy Perry attempted a more personal intervention to break the nuns' resistance. In a highly unusual top-secret meeting, arranged at the Archdiocese's headquarters, Perry sat down face-to-face with Sister Rita Callanan and Sister Catherine Rose Holtzman. In an effort to prove her pure intentions and spiritual alignment, the superstar showed the skeptical sisters a Jesus tattoo permanently inked onto her wrist. She then went as far as to drop to her knees and deliver an impromptu, a cappella performance of the classic gospel hymn, "Oh Happy Day," right in front of them. Perry pleaded with the women, explaining that she simply wanted a quiet, beautiful space to live with her mother and grandmother. The performance fell entirely flat. The nuns remained completely unmoved, later telling the press that the meeting felt forced and that the performance did absolutely nothing to change their minds about her public image. With diplomacy a failure, the corporate machinery of the lawsuit cranked back into high gear. Perry's high-priced legal team, alongside the church's attorneys, systematically dismantled the defense over the course of two highly publicized, grueling trial phases. They successfully argued that under California Corporation's code and Catholic canon law, the nuns had no legal standing to sell the property without the explicit written permission of Archbishop Jose Gomez. By late 2017, a Los Angeles jury handed Perry and the Archdiocese a total, devastating victory. The court found that Dana Hollister had acted with deliberate malice, fraud, and a reckless disregard for the law when she took control of the convent. The jury slammed the developer with a staggering $15 million judgment, consisting of $3.2 million in direct attorney fees for Perry, $3.4 million for the Archdiocese, and millions more in punitive damages. The sheer, astronomical weight of the financial defeat did exactly what it was designed to do. It pushed Hollister's hospitality company into immediate corporate bankruptcy, completely neutralizing her as a rival and forcing her to surrender the keys to the hilltop. But this grand legal triumph carried a dark, tragic shadow that would permanently stain Katy Perry's real estate legacy. In March 2018, the litigation returned to the headlines for a final, heartbreaking chapter. Sister Catherine Rose Holtzman, then 89 years old and visibly weakened by 3 straight years of relentless legal stress and public scrutiny, arrived at a Los Angeles courthouse for a post-judgment hearing. Standing before a wall of television cameras and journalists, she delivered a trembling, emotional plea directly to the superstar, stating plainly, "To Katy Perry, please stop. It's not doing anyone any good except hurting people." Moments later, after walking inside the active courthouse to attend the proceedings, Sister Catherine collapsed and died on the floor.
This has been a very ugly battle for the ownership of this convent. It's been Katy Perry aligned with the Archdiocese versus these nuns. One of them died in court today.
Her sudden death sent shockwaves through the community, transforming the narrative from a standard real estate dispute into a tragic tale of institutional pressure, crushing a vulnerable old woman. Sister Rita Callanan was left to fight on alone, publicly accusing the pop star of having blood on her hands. Yet, in a bizarre twist of fate, the victory that cost a human life ultimately evaporated into nothing. Even though Perry had successfully crushed her opposition and won the legal right to purchase the estate, the transaction became hopelessly entangled in international bureaucratic red tape. Because the property value exceeded $7.5 million, Catholic law required the deal to receive a final stamp of approval from the Vatican in Rome. The Holy See refused to finalize the sale until the Los Angeles Archdiocese fulfilled a strict, non-negotiable condition: finding and securing a suitable high-end replacement house of prayer to safely relocate the surviving displaced nuns. The Archdiocese repeatedly struggled with the logistics, and as the months turned into years, the vacant convent sat gathering dust. Finally, in August 2019, Katy Perry's cash contract and her $14.5 million offer quietly expired. She walked away from the Hill without ever moving a single piece of furniture inside, leaving behind a bankrupt developer, a broken sisterhood, and a tragic legacy, proving that her pursuit of California soil always leaves a trail of devastation before she simply moves on to the next target. While the ashes of the convent deal were still cooling in Rome, Perry didn't slow down. Instead, she took the aggressive legal tactics she sharpened in Los Feliz and applied them directly to the hyper-luxury residential markets of Los Angeles, transforming herself from a mere home buyer into a ruthless, tactical property flipper. The Fortress Flip Playbook. Before settling her sights on the coastal enclave of Montecito, Katy Perry operated in the real estate world less like a nesting pop star and more like a high-stakes corporate developer. Her signature strategy relied on an aggressive land grab methodology, buying up neighboring properties to construct heavily fortified, isolated compounds, holding the ridge lines until market conditions peaked, and then fragmenting the land to squeeze out massive multi-million-dollar profits. Her first major tactical deployment occurred in 2013, when she spent over $11 million to acquire 2 sprawling, side-by-side estates atop a secluded ridge in the Hollywood Hills, one of which she wrestled away from oil heiress Eileen Getty. Perry merged the properties into a massive, heavily guarded fortress, creating an impenetrable sanctuary away from the paparazzi. She lived there for years, but the moment her aesthetic shifted, she dismantled the compound, selling the properties off individually in a series of drawn-out, highly calculated market listings that netted her a staggering return on investment. She duplicated this exact playbook in 2017 when she entered the ultra-exclusive, gate-guarded community of Hidden Valley in Beverly Hills. She started by dropping $18 million on a gorgeous, ivy-covered Regency-style mansion. But a single estate wasn't enough to satisfy her need for total privacy and dominance. Just a year later, in 2018, she quietly weaponized her capital to buy the house right next door for an additional $7.5 million, publicly claiming she simply needed a swanky guest house to harbor her visiting friends and family. The sprawling Beverly Hills compound seemed permanent, but by 2021, Perry's real estate gaze had already drifted north towards Santa Barbara County. With ice-cold corporate efficiency, she abandoned the compound entirely, unloading the adjacent guest house and eventually flipping the main estate for a cool $25 million. She completely stripped her roots out of Beverly Hills, walking away with a fortune and proving that to her, California's most luxurious dirt is nothing more than a chessboard. The Australian fashion war, Goliath versus Katy. While Perry was aggressively conquering California real estate, her corporate legal machinery was busy waging a ruthless, multi-decade war across the globe. This time, the target wasn't prime acreage or historic convent bricks. It was an independent, small business fashion designer from Sydney, Australia, whose unfortunate crime was simply being born with the name Katy Perry. The David versus Goliath corporate nightmare ignited back in 2009. The independent designer, whose birth name was Katy Jane Perry, later Taylor, had established a modest homegrown clothing line. Right as the pop star's musical career exploded with "I Kissed a Girl," Perry's high-powered international lawyers fired off a fierce cease and desist letter, demanding the designer immediately withdraw her local trademark application. When the designer bravely refused to surrender her birth name, Perry's corporate entities unleashed a relentless campaign of legal attrition, attempting to forcefully cancel the designer's trademark. For nearly 17 grueling years, the global pop icons team aggressively pursued the small business owner through the Australian court system, claiming the designer's clothing brand would cause mass consumer confusion with the pop star's global concert merchandise. The battle became a psychological and financial meat grinder for the Australian designer, who publicly detailed the staggering emotional toll of being systematically bullied by a multi-million-dollar celebrity machine. Perry's legal camp showed no mercy, aggressively appealing the case even after a lower court initially ruled in the designer's favor. However, the relentless crusade spectacularly backfired. The epic dispute finally reached its climax before the High Court of Australia, which handed down a definitive majority ruling completely vindicating the small fashion label.
Australian fashion designer Katy Perry has won her High Court battle with international singing star Katy Perry in a trademark dispute. The two have been fighting over the use of the name for well over a decade.
The High Court fiercely rejected the pop star's overreaching arguments, ruling that celebrity music fame does not give a superstar the right to monopolize adjacent commercial markets like clothing. In a scathing legal twist, the justices officially designated Perry's own merchandise company and distributor as assiduous infringers of the Australian designer's legitimate trademark. While a spokesperson for the pop star hollowly claimed they never intended to shut down the small business, the absolute defeat stood as a massive public relations disaster. It proved to the world that whether Perry is fighting an aging veteran, an order of elderly nuns, or a small-town fashion designer, her corporate instinct is to aggressively litigate her opposition into absolute submission. From Hollywood royalty to political chess. While Perry was successfully flexing her corporate dominance over independent business owners abroad, her tightly structured domestic life was completely fracturing at the seams. The heavily litigated $15 million Montecito fortress, originally fought for with tooth and nail ferocity to serve as the ultimate permanent dream compound for her and her fiancé, Orlando Bloom, would never actually see the couple cross its threshold as a family unit. In a shocking turn of events that completely blindsided the entertainment world, Perry and Bloom officially terminated their high-profile relationship, bringing a sudden end to their nearly decade-long romance and 6-year engagement. The sudden domestic split instantly transformed the newly won Santa Barbara estate from a highly anticipated family sanctuary into a massive, emotionally compromised financial asset. Rather than moving her fractured family into the meticulously renovated 9,300-square-foot villa, Perry pivoted with ice-cold corporate efficiency. She completely abandoned the idea of occupying the property herself and immediately converted the mansion into a high-end luxury investment vehicle, leasing it out to Hollywood power couple Chris Pratt and Katherine Schwarzenegger for a jaw-dropping $70,000 per month. With her California roots radically loosening and her domestic life shattered, Perry completely turned her back on Hollywood real estate and looked toward a stunningly unexpected international horizon. Shifting away from the glitz of Los Angeles, The pop star sent global media outlets into an absolute frenzy when she went public with an astonishing, high-profile new romance. Former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The unexpected pairing quickly became the most scrutinized and heavily debated celebrity connection of the year, with the couple frequently hard-launching their relationship across social media and cozying up publicly at high-profile events from Paris to the VIP tents at Coachella. As rumors aggressively swirl that Perry is now actively eyeing massive, ultra-exclusive estate acquisitions across Canada to plant new roots alongside the prominent politician, her long-term strategy remains crystal clear. Whether she is weaponizing high-priced legal teams against small-scale fashion labels, abandoning the multi-million-dollar mansions she spent half a decade ruthlessly fighting for, or trading Hollywood actors for international political figures, Katy Perry views the world as an elite chessboard where properties, titles, and empires are constantly traded, conquered, and left behind. Perry's high-stakes history proves that her greatest talent isn't just topping the Billboard charts, it is her willingness to execute total, unyielding warfare across every arena she enters. Whether she is grinding down a frail billionaire veteran in the sun-drenched hills of Montecito, pushing an aging order of rogue nuns to absolute breaking point in Los Feliz, or spending nearly 2 decades trying to legally strip a small-town Australian artisan of her own birth name, Perry operates with a terrifying corporate pragmatism. Homes, names, and empires are merely chess pieces to be claimed, fortified, and flipped when the wind changes direction. For more stories just like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button below so you never miss another Deep Dive Expose.